Directness was not is not like direct instruction. Directness was referred in chapter 13 to confidence or student confidence. He didn't feel that putting students on the spot by using maybe randomization strategies was a good way of promoting learning. He felt that students with confidence would denote the straightforwardness with which one goes at what he has to do. And what he means is students will want to learn because they have the confidence to learn. They don't need to be told to learn. They already have those basic skills. And he talked about open-mindedness. And he said that accessibility of mind to any and every consideration that will throw light upon the situation that needs to be cleared up. So essentially what he's saying is being open to new ideas and to new knowledge and how students can apply that and categorize that and use that in the future. And then he talked about single-mindedness, which is mental integrity. And what he meant by that was that students are empowered to learn because they understand that if they fail, that there are consequences for that, and if they succeed, that there are benefits and that can be reaped from that. And so he thought that that was a very important component of these strategies. And he talked about responsibility, and this is an intellectual attitude, and this kind of ties into the previous slide. But really what he was talking about is how they understand the implications of their choices and how they act on them. And that's one of the problems today, is that students really don't understand the consequences of the things that they're learning or the things that they're doing, and that by enlightening them, that they will probably make better choices. Okay, so that was the end of chapter 13. And then we have just the final chapter, chapter 14. And this is on the nature of subject matter. And this was probably our favorite chapter that we covered because we deal with this so commonly in the classroom every day. Subject matter, he felt, was composed of meanings which supply content to social life. And it's basically what allows the learner to adapt and to understand the concepts that are being taught. Dewey felt that subject matter represented the ideas of the shared collective, and essentially he felt that you can't gain mastery of this through simple association. So basically what you need to do is you need to use higher order thinking skills, because you have to be thinking about the greater society as well as your local community. And so he felt that subject matter's ultimate goal is a core need of society. In many ways, it's tied into like social norms. He felt that the purpose of subject matter was to supply definite standards and perpetuate social norms. There are a couple of reasons for that. Basically, it's standardized learning so that concrete core values of society are not misunderstood. And then it also guided instructors who are delivering content. And all of that's tied into our social value systems, our norm systems. Okay, so the purpose also guided the instructor's own learning, so that instructors and pupils would be on this basically on the same page. The purpose is not to formulate learning in ways that replicate the learning of the instructor. What he meant by that was that the learning that takes place in the classroom, even though it may reflect greater society, it doesn't necessarily have to be the same shared experiences of that teacher. The importance is that the main social norms are taught, or correlation with greater society are taught, but that students are able to still individualize that learning. He identified a couple of problems with subject matter delivery. The largest problem was that teachers typically know the content that's going to be delivered, and the student doesn't. And we deal with that on a regular basis, whether we're teaching math or teaching history or teaching science. And one of the solutions was that even though the teacher knows all the content, the teacher needs to be aware of the student's proficiency with that content. And he felt that even though the teacher knew the material, it was just as important that the teacher be aware of the student attitudes and the responses of the pupils to that subject matter. So he didn't feel it was necessarily that important that he was able to teach everything to the minute detail. Dewey thought it would be much more important that the teacher be aware of the students and how they're responding to that material. And the question is, why is that philosophy important? And Dewey previously had written in previous chapters that if students are not engaged, they're not going to be actively categorizing that learning and remembering that information and storing that knowledge. And so if the student engagement is low, that information is not going to be retained. And he felt that scholarship was not the means to the end. Teaching cannot solve problems that are there with poor teaching. So you can't teach yourself out of a box. You have to have good content delivery and be aware of how the students are responding so that you're able to change, maybe change your teaching style or change the way that your classroom is set up or whatever it takes so that students are engaged and working with each other and storing and collaborating. So here's a good quote. I'll read it here. To the one who is learned, subject matter is extensive, accurately defined, and logically interrelated. To the one who is learning, it is fluid, partial, and connected through his personal occupations. The problem of teaching is to keep the experience of the student moving in the direction of what the expert already knows. Hence, the need that the teacher knows both subject matter and the characteristic needs and capacities of the student. And that's very clear. Dewey is saying here, if you're a teacher, you already know the content. The goal is to ensure that your students are following you, learning with you, and engaging in the learning process. Simply delivering the content is not going to be enough for students to understand it, and they're not going to take anything from it if they're not comprehending it and they're not categorizing it, they're not storing it, they're not creating new knowledge, they're not using it. Just being rote, having them sit there, taking notes, and then taking a test is not going to help students learn. So, there are three main ways he felt that knowledge existed. The first one was as the content of intelligent ability or the power to do. And that's just either being previously exposed to it or whatnot. And then he thought the second way was morphed and extended through communicated knowledge or information. And that can be through collaboration or through reading or speaking. And then finally, continually working could turn that knowledge into a logical sequence of information. And that what that means is working with that knowledge, applying that knowledge, and then using that knowledge in ways that hadn't been used before, either being presented with something they don't understand or using it in a way that either they're taking a chance or they're applying it to another situation. But knowledge doesn't just exist. It has to come from somewhere. And so he felt that the first stages of knowledge came from doing, like walking or talking or reading or writing or riding a horse. This is the earliest stage of learning, and so much of it is instinctive. And so he felt that early learners are, because that learning is instinctive, they quote unquote can't help themselves because they lack the formative knowledge to know the difference between right and wrong. And you could say that's impulse. And you see that in young children. They'll do things based on impulse because they're instinctive. They don't understand the difference between right and wrong. And Dewey's saying that that's not a bad thing. Later learners should rely on connections with others and intercommunication and sharing of experiences. And he would expect that early learners would make that transition slowly into learners who would be able to understand, for example, that a child had fallen and hurt their arm because they jumped off the bed, that later on as they grow older, they wouldn't jump off the roof of a house because they would understand that jumping off the roof of a house could make your arm hurt. And so he felt that the ear is as much an organ of experiences as the eye or hand. And what he means by that is that he wouldn't necessarily have to jump off of a house to know that it's like when he was a kid, when he jumped off the bed. He might have a friend that jumped off a roof of a house and broke their arm and realized that, well, when he jumped off the bed when he was younger, he hurt himself. So maybe it might be a bad idea to jump off the house. So, are there problems with that? Absolutely. Because most people believe knowledge stands for a body of facts, whether it be, a dictionary, an encyclopedia, an atlas, or even a library. And Dewey doesn't necessarily believe that to be true. Dewey does not categorize knowledge as just necessarily just data. He believed that knowledge was much deeper. He believed that people who felt knowledge was just data. They're wrong. He felt that knowledge is deep inquiry. He felt that it is course of study. He felt it is command of the subject matter. And he felt that knowledge is stimulating and encourages further learning. And so this all ties into why we say we need to empower our students. If we empower our students and stimulate them, then they're going to want to learn because they have the knowledge to know that knowledge is interesting and it's stimulating and it makes us happy and confident. And so for that very reason, he felt that subject matter is social. He felt that there are positive and negative implications for enacting subject matter in schools. He felt that subject matter can be irrelevant if it doesn't connect to a learner's social norms. An example of that would be if you force students to learn about cultures they don't identify with. Would they learn something? They might learn facts, but can they apply that to their own situation? Probably not. And if they can't, then they're not going to be engaged in that. And he felt that people don't make poor choices in subject matter because they're misguided or that they're mean or whatever. He felt that as adults, knowledge has become a routine thing for us, that we lose that connection with learning and we lose that connection with students and how they're learning. And if we want to help our students learn better, then we need to reconnect ourselves with those basic principles of learning. I thought that this quote was very powerful. The notion that the essentials of elementary education are the three R's mechanically treated is based upon ignorance of the essentials needed for realization of democratic ideals. Basically, Dewey is saying that schools who focus on rote learning are forgetting that learning must be engaging. And there are many people that say, well, No Child Left Behind has been a failure because of testing. That's not necessarily true. The testing is fine. It's the way that schools are approaching the idea of testing. Instead of helping students get prepared for a test by doing something through association or project or problem-based learning, they're teaching to a test, and students are shutting down, and their scores are going down. Graduation rates are dropping. Dropout rates are skyrocketing. You see higher levels of pregnancy and substance abuse among students because they're bored and because they don't want to come to school. Because if they don't come to school, we threaten them with not coming to school. And so they come to school because they have to. And they come to school and they're not engaged. And he felt that a curriculum which acknowledges the social responsibilities of education must present situations where problems are relevant to the problems of living together and where observation and information are calculated to develop social insight and interest. And in short, what he's trying to say here is a good curriculum will tap into what students know. It will ask them to apply the knowledge that they're learning and then to become better members of society because they are aware of their surroundings, they're aware of what's going on around them, and they are trying to become a better person. And they're not afraid to take a chance because they have the confidence of knowing that knowledge is an ongoing process.